Welcome back to the Rogue Trader podcast with me, Nick Leeson. Today, I'm joined by one of my co-hosts, Oonagh van den Burg, who's an expert in the world of compliance and risk management, but she also knows, because of her experience in both of those areas, she comes across an awful lot of scams in both the industry and scams that are affecting people in the world just in general terms. So we're going to talk about some of those today, give you some tips, talk about the ones that are most prevalent at the moment, what you should be looking out for. And I've had the misfortune, I suppose, of looking at a few of these over the last number of months and years. And it is quite shocking, the impact that this has on people, both from an embarrassment perspective, but also I think it has far more damaging complications for people as well. So it's why you need to be more aware of what's going on. And there is nobody better in the world to explain that to you than Oonagh. So welcome, Oonagh.
Thanks, Nick. Expert, I think that was kind of like a label I gave myself, but no, I'm only joking. You're absolutely right. And I think you and I, recently kind of working together as well, we've seen a number of scams that are really impacting people's lives. And the unfortunate part is we're also not seeing the banks stepping up to treat the customers fairly either.
Yeah.
This year alone in the UK, we've got this new APP reimbursement scheme that came through in October last year, which was great and welcomed by the industry. But the challenge was we didn't have real stats around what type of fraud was happening on the authorized push payment side. And what we've now began to see through that scheme introduction is an absolute avalanche of cases, to the extent that banks aren't even responding to individuals' complaints, not even within the regulatory timelines, but they're just not responding. And it's leaving individuals very much with well, who am I supposed to speak to? Who is there to protect me? I give the bank my money. I support them for years. I've now been put in a situation through, to an extent, no fault of their own, because there's a total lack of education, which we'll talk about as well. And then the banks just radio silence. And it's actually really impacting, can I say, kind of victim mentality, where these individuals, they are victims.
Yeah.
And they're being treated like, in some cases, it's their own fault. And when people aren't responding to them, it makes them feel, to an extent, worthless, which is something we're seeing more and more. And it's actually really impacting not just individuals' mental health, but their entire lives, their marriages, their families, their jobs. Some individuals are losing jobs. They just can't focus because they've lost everything. So I really am looking forward with you to not just discussing this together, but also bringing in some people that, we've met along the way, regulators, people in the industry, and also individuals impacted. So we can really get that holistic understanding of the problem statement. But most importantly, there are solutions available. And only this week, the banks have announced that the regulators have instructed them to use their bumper profits this year to invest in better technology to prevent AI fraud. And you're smiling because we both know that's never going to happen. And we also know that many banks have a slush fund, if I can say that, set aside for enforcement action, which they're not going to dip into either for technology. So the question is this the responsibility of the banks? Does law enforcement and regulators need to do more, and even at a government level? Or is it something, given the nature of scams today, which are very global, do we need to go bigger than that? And does this need to become an inter kind of global organization that's tackling this? Because the problems we're seeing are mostly overseas nowadays.
Yeah, I think I think just based on the statement that you just made, it's falling through the cracks. Who is taking responsibility for it? Everybody's looking at everybody else, thinking you should be doing something.
Yeah.
But in our experience, and we've seen this in a number of cases ourselves, the sums of money are just getting bigger. The frauds are very targeted. They're very complex. They're very well organized. They're very targeted in terms of everything that they do, and that the way that they pull the man in the street, if you like, or the woman in the street into some of these frauds is just astounding. Sometimes when I'm looking at some of the WhatsApp messages that are going back and forth as these things are as these things are unfolding. It's like a Hollywood movie. You're saying,
Oh,
just stop. Will you stop doing this? But they somehow manage to, lure the person even further into the fraud. And the sums of money. I mean, we've looked at one case ourselves or a couple of cases ourselves, where it's over £1 million. It's astounding how much it goes on. I think of my own. If I get a WhatsApp message pops up on my phone from somebody I don't know, I delete it straight away. I don't know you. I'm not going to,
yeah.
I'm not going to engage in conversation with you. But it's strange how many people do, just in that very first instance.
It's all psychological, and that's the real thing that's changed. If I may just address the first point, like on the banks and the bumper profits, the banks are entitled to make money. Like
Yeah,
that's the business they're in. They're there to make money, like any other organization. Don't be mistaken to think that the bank is your friend. They're not. They're a company which are providing you with a product. You're buying their services. They're entitled to make money. The fact that you have been involved in a scam or a fraud, is it by default the bank's fault? Well, in some instances, we've seen a total lack of monitoring, a
yeah,
total lack of basically understanding of the behavior we should expect to see on an account. So, yes, to an extent, the bank has a regulatory obligation there. But is it the bank's responsibility to invest their hard earned funds into trying to prevent, people getting themselves involved in frauds? And there is a big kind of dialogue and argument there about that. But obviously, to the second point, the psychological manipulation of these frauds, exactly what you've mentioned there. We've seen these WhatsApp messages, and you're thinking, how are you perpetrating? Like, how can this keep continuing?
mm,
And what happens is they're very, very sophisticated. They're targeting people at a certain, there's two types of frauds, especially in romance and investment scams that we're seeing. You've
yeah,
either got we're going to hit everybody and see where you just throw it and see where it sticks. So that's
yeah,
your WhatsApp messages where it's like, hey, like a YouTube video and we'll give you £5 or €5. And it's like, great. And then, have you got a bank account? First you have to, we have to see if you're qualified to work with us. We'd
yeah,
love for you to do some more work. Do you happen to have a bank account with any of these banks? So, and they'll list out the bank names, and it's like, oh, yes, I do. Brilliant. You can work with us. And I give us your bank details. And inadvertently, these people become money mules.
yeah,
Either their account is being used without their awareness, or they're aware of the money's going through their account and they're processing what they think is payments for other
yeah,
people liking YouTube videos. But in fact, it's all scam. It's money mule activity. So the problem is these individuals will end up being charged with money laundering.
yeah,
And in most instances, they're actually individuals who are struggling financially themselves. That's why they've said they've jumped at the chance of getting an extra €5, €10. And we've seen some of those scams.
yeah,
On the other end, and so I mentioned that is the throw it, and if it sticks, we're going to get someone. And you'd be surprised how many of these a day even I see in my WhatsApp. I don't know who's given my number where. It must be in a phone box or something. But I'm getting all of these kind of calls. But on the other hand, we see the very, very targeted scams where they single out, individuals that are near retirement age,
yeah,
that potentially are divorced or widowed, who have still stable incomes and good jobs. So you're checking out their LinkedIn. You're looking potentially to see their social media. Have they got a Facebook? Oh, look, there's them with the grandkids and they're going on a nice holiday. The problem is, to scammers, this is the green light for, wow, imagine we can make a romantic connection with this individual and then begin to bleed them for their life savings. And
yeah,
going back to, the discussion we're having there about seeing these WhatsApp messages, that's what you're seeing. You're
yeah,
seeing something starting as a very high level academic discussion about, oh, my boss would love to meet you. They're not on LinkedIn because they're quite private, but they'd like to meet you just to talk about the market. Very, very high level. There's no investment being discussed. Then it moves to that individual contacting them. And in most cases, it's a very, very glamorous woman, much like myself. I'm joking. But no, mostly, we're seeing a lot of Asian women, very glamorous. And if you did a reverse search of these women on Google, you'll
yeah,
find out that they're actually models or celebrities in Korea or Singapore. But again, these individuals that are being targeted are not tech savvy. So they're
Yeah.
not doing this reverse engineering. And what's happening is this individual is sending them pictures of them, riding a horse or at the spa or having dinner or making some food at a I don't know, a cookery class.
Yeah.
And you're sitting looking at these messages going, how could you be falling for this? But it's the psychological side of it. These
Yeah.
individuals are lonely and they've fallen in love with somebody they think that wants to spend their life with them, and they're saying all the right things, they're buying them gifts. It's really, really a sad, sad state of affairs.
Yeah, and the reverse search that you've mentioned, it's such a simple thing to do, and it's going to give you so much information about this alleged person that's contacting you, because the picture's going to pop up in 50 or 60 different locations. It's crazy when you look at them, and it's such a simple thing to do, but people don't do it. They tend to believe, I suppose, is the easiest way to describe it, and then they just start to dig themselves deeper and deeper into that situation. I was laughing when you were talking, but my own email was hacked a little while ago, and you probably know this, but because you probably got emails from me, and I can't use that email anymore. But as you explained, they invaded everything on social media from my perspective, and they were sending. It shocked me that they were sending emails to all of these individuals asking them for Amazon gift cards and stuff like that. Like anybody who knew me would have known I'd be asking for far more money than
exactly. Do you not know Nick's rate? Seriously, are we? You know what? That's how you can tell your real friends, Nick. Like
Exactly.
They didn't even know me. They deserve to have bought an Amazon gift card. It's their fault.
Yeah. So anyway,
Christmas card list cancelled.
Yeah, I did get a few emails back, but no Apple or Amazon gift cards. But it is it is crazy. The amounts are getting bigger and bigger. One of the things that maybe I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about, we talk a lot about duty of care from the banks, and they do have a duty of care. Lots of these people have been with the banks for 30, 40, even longer periods of time, and the banks aren't doing enough. And I'm sure that they can, they'd happily fall on their sword and say they can't look after everybody with the same degree of duty of care, but you've got vulnerable people who are being targeted, and we're seeing large amounts of money come into a bank account, go out the next day. When you look at it in isolation, and you and I both have, it's just shocking what goes on that goes undetected by the banks.
And it shouldn't. But just to your email point, I won't receive any emails, or you won't get any from me, Nick, because you've totally blocked me on your email. We need the IT guy to explore that one. No, but you're absolutely right. When we've looked at these cases, and even in isolation, we have seen same-day transfers coming in and straight back out again. And we're not talking small amounts of money. We're talking here about 100, 150,000 in some cases.
Yeah.
And, what we've seen in various cases is people mortgaging their homes in order to get the money that they need for this individual. We've seen people selling their cars. And so the question you have to ask yourself as a bank is, so you have all of these, let's be honest, banks have transaction monitoring systems in place, which is a regulatory requirement. So guess what? That box is ticked. Brilliant.
Yeah.
What do those systems do? Well, they actually track rules and scenarios. And you know what? I am going to speak publicly about this, because we always say, oh, we shouldn't give the fraudsters too much information. And I always laugh. These guys are 20 steps ahead of us. They know our controls inside out. They know our sanction lists. They know our controls. The only thing they won't know is how the rules and scenarios have been calibrated within the banks. But that is very specific to the bank's risk appetite. And by calibration, what I mean is when you implement the rules and the scenarios, you'll put in monetary thresholds or multiple thresholds for multiple payments, and then a kind of a combination of a payment to a certain value. And that will all be dictated by the bank. Sorry to kind of go into detail, just to explain to people what that means. It's not very technical. I make it sound technical, but it's not. So you're implementing these rules. What we're then doing is we're bucketing individuals into like for like. And one of the things, especially I saw in private banking over the years, was you can never put two clients in the same bucket because they're all very, very niche and specific to themselves. So I remember, and this is as far back as like 2013, sitting at my desk, just looking at what was available to me as a product to do this monitoring and realizing I'm never going to find anything because the system, it's not going to be able to tell me anything about the customer's behavior. I need to look at what I know about the client, how I expect the account to be used, what I expect the third parties to be, both inward and outward, what I expect those monetary values to be inward and outward. And if anything, or any of those parameters start to change, then I need to look at it because it could be an indication that we need to better service our client, that the client's needs have changed, but it could also be an indication that the client's account has been hacked or there's fraud, or that one of the employees of the client is misusing their power of attorney on the account. So all of these aspects. And in all of those cases, you'll end up with a legal liability if there is a legal case brought by the client, because the first question will be, well, where's our recourse? Who's got the most money if we need to get our money back? Well, the bank. Let's start there. And then we're not going to get it back from the employee that works for us. They're going to go to prison. They have no money. So you're going to start with the bank, but the bank's controls don't work. And with the current controls that we have, putting aside AI usage, but based on rules and scenarios, the systems are somewhere between 2 to 8% accurate. That is a horrendous statistic. And when I say 2 to 8%, 2% is actually positive hits where you're being, and that's, if you think that's 2 out of 100 are right of the hits that you get, you're just lucky. You literally, you may as well just be spinning around with the blindfold on and just pointing at different client files and picking one. But the other 6% is what you find in the client book when you start investigating the alert. I had a situation there a number of years ago where there were some frequent payments coming in to a client's account from a third party. So we were to look into it. So we looked into it. And the first thing that you do is you go back to the client to say, what are these payments for? And this was in Asia. And the client came back and said, oh, that's my partner. Or in this case, the individual was a mistress, so to speak, of the individual. So every month she was receiving her stipend, her money from the person that she was in this relationship with, and that was funding her lifestyle. Particularly in Asia, that's actually a rationale that's given that will close out an alert in many cases, because it's quite common. And you're told it's not your place to pry further into your client's business. But in this situation, what had happened was the individual that was sending the money also had an account with the same bank. So we were able to look through the payment and see what was happening in the other account. And guess what? Every month on the same day that individual got the payment, the other individual that was sending the money received an amount of money from outside of Hong Kong, as this was in Hong Kong, outside of Hong Kong, that was coming in to that individual's account. He was then sending exactly 90% every time to this woman. And you have to ask yourself, okay, so now this doesn't seem to make sense. Where is this? Why is this guy keeping a 10% cut of this money and then sending the other 90% to this individual? Suddenly you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense. In the end, it turned out that it was a human trafficking ring, that the individual the money was being sent to was running a number of spas or beauty parlors that were fronts for prostitution. And that's how these cases end up being uncovered. But if we hadn't looked through the payment and just accepted the rationale that was given because it was a good customer, this wouldn't have gone any further. So the problem is the bank's controls are very much based on the individual reviewing the alert if an alert occurs. And sometimes you also need to look beyond the alert and really, I also have seen enforcement action happening against banks where they closed out the alert too soon. And one of the things that really worries me is a lot of these alerts we actually bring in third parties to help where we have backlogs. Like consultancy firms, like the big four come in, you'll have maybe 50, 100 people being brought in to close a backlog for transaction monitoring alerts. And that's great. But each of these individuals is given a KPI, a key performance indicator, which says you need to close out 10 alerts in one day. So they're against the clock. And if they don't meet those 10 alerts a day, you could lose your job. So are these individuals, firstly, are they properly trained to be reviewing these alerts? Do they really understand the client? Are they having enough time to familiarize yourself with the account? The answer is no. What is their target? It's literally like going into a, I don't know, like a gaming studio. You want to get your 10. That's your target for the day. And if you get more than 10, guess what? You get a bonus. So it's absolutely ludicrous. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with bad systems that are producing absolute garbage, that are resulting in backlogs, that we're bringing in untrained people to review, who are given daily targets and financially incentivized to close out the alerts as fast as possible. As you rightly said at the beginning, it's broken, but it's actually not even broken. It's a perfect storm, because how many of these individuals that are perpetrating the crimes are actually ever going to be identified?
And the fraudsters are using that to their advantage. They know the difficulties that they probably have people on the inside anyway. But I thought, when we started this a few months ago, I thought the thing that was quite shocking for me was where the fraudsters are based, how they're organising their business, the whole commune type of scenario that you're seeing in certain locations in Asia, and the people that they're using to actually perpetrate the frauds are almost, being held against. Well, they are being held against their wishes, and they're being forced to put forward these sort of scams.
Yes.
Perhaps give us just an insight into some of the things that you've seen there in terms of how the fraudster is set up to perpetrate these frauds and the type of stuff you're facing.
Yeah, Nick, that was a really great question, because only this week the Thai government have actually come out to say that they're going to be switching off the electricity to one of these compounds. And I do apologize for mentioning Asia a few times, in the scams we spoke about. But having spent 12 years in Asia, I have a lot of experience of what I've seen when I was out there, which obviously was very geographic Pacific. But also some of the scams that we've recently looked at have had a nexus to Asia, in particular Hong Kong. And, over the past 6-7 months, the US government has come out quite critically about Hong Kong, in particular, about it being a kind of basically a playground for criminals to basically to run illicit activities in the financial space. And I was actually quite surprised about that. But when I saw the stats in a recent report I was reading, the stats actually added up. And in fact, shockingly to me, the country that came out on top was Italy. And if you had asked me 10 years ago or 15 years ago, which country in Europe has the most lax AML controls, the answer was Italy. Right. But it's incredible as what happened. And that's probably an indication as to why the new head of AMLA, Bruna, she actually is Italian, and she's come from the supervisory board there, the single resolution board. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But specific to these crimes in Asia, what is happening is they've set up these compounds. Pre-COVID, these were just a few sheds, nothing exciting. Since COVID, these compounds have grown in magnitude like you wouldn't believe. And maybe what we can do actually is afterwards and during editing is to put some of the pictures of the compounds pre and after. Like, it is, when you see the comparative analysis, it's shocking. Now, when they then bring individuals into these compounds to perpetrate the crimes, mostly they're pig butchering, which I think they want to change the name of, which is where they call up people and get them to invest in crypto. And then they send over the monies and then it all disappears. When these investments happen as well, they generally have the conversion to crypto, to ETH. ETH is very, very common. You're not seeing a lot of Bitcoin. Mostly it's like ETH. And when we see the conversion, it happens on a completely legitimate platform, completely legitimate. Right. But it's the transfer post that normally is a scam setup. And you will be sent an app, which you download to your phone, which may look and feel like other apps in this space, but in fact, they're not. They're all scams. So do your homework. But to your point, which is really, really important here, is these individuals that are sitting in these compounds, they're not there through choice. No. Many of them have been kidnapped. And when I say kidnapped, they've applied for jobs outside of Thailand or Myanmar or Cambodia, where for advertisements with the likes of the big four, or is Uber or Facebook, you name it.
Yeah.
They're then given money and a plane ticket to fly in. They get the job. It's all brilliant. There's somebody at the airport with a sign up waiting for them, picks them up in the airport, then drives them to the side of a river. And at gunpoint, they have to get into a boat, go across the river to the compound, which is, electric fences, guard dogs, barbed wire, you name it. And they're then brought into these compounds, and they're chosen because of their literacy in English,
Yeah.
because all of these crimes are going to happen in the West. So they're targeting, medium to high net worth individuals in Europe and also in the US. So these individuals, predominantly actually is mostly UK, Ireland, and Americas. So they need to speak really good English. So they have these people, they bring them in. In some instances, they torture these individuals. Now, the Thai authorities have said before they couldn't go into the compounds because the crimes aren't happening on shore, because the actual illicit activity is happening in the West. It's happening against individuals in the West. Okay, so what is happening on shore? Well, human trafficking, kidnapping. Prove it. Prove that these individuals have been kidnapped. To their families, they've just disappeared off the face of the earth. Some of the families don't even know where they are. So there's a massive issue behind this. But then on the other hand, you have the individuals that are losing their life savings because they're investing, and what they're seeing at their side is what is the frightening point. As I mentioned about these apps, which you and I have seen, they download and they're investing the money and they're seeing returns which are incredible. It's like Bitcoin going through the roof every day. So, they've invested, let's say, 1 million, and they've made 10 million. And it's like, wow. And it's like, okay, but to get your money back out now, they got to a point where like, okay, I've put all my money into this. I just want to take my money out. Oh, but to get your money out, you need to pay taxes. And they're just looking at this 10 million, and they're like, in some cases, obviously the monetary value differs, but whatever that number is, they're like, okay, I want to get my money out. Okay, but you need to pay the tax. The tax is, I don't know, let's say 5%. And they're like so desperate to get this money out that they're willing to mortgage their home, sell their car, you name it. And then they pay the tax, and in most cases, the tax doesn't even make sense, because it'll be, for example, they're asked to pay. Sorry, the dog has joined. They're asked to pay a tax in the likes of Singapore or somewhere where this, they're sending money to another location. It's ridiculous, but people aren't thinking at that stage. What they are thinking is, I need to get my money out. So what you have to remember is, everybody always jumps to all these terrible people that contacted, my grandmother or my aunt and stole the money. Well, actually, no, those poor people are also victims themselves. It's who's behind it. The Thai authorities, as I mentioned, said their hands are completely tied. So what they're doing is trying to switch off the power supply. But let's not be stupid. These guys will have generators. They'll have backup support. There's always going to be a solution on their side,
and they can always move. There's very simple solutions. There's always somewhere that they base themselves. There's a few of them in Eastern Europe as well these days. But I think just to finish up here, in the next minute or so, we wanted to touch on more scams, but there are far too many. That's the unfortunate part of this. But even in some of those examples that we've looked at, when you get to that tax paying element of it, the person who's speaking to you will do you the favor of paying some of it for you in order to pull you in that last little bit. It's all, it's just a massive confidence trick from beginning to end. But there's far too many of them. But there are things that can be done, right? And
there are absolutely things that can be done. And I don't want to say that artificial intelligence is the magic solution, but there are actually aspects of AI functionality, including behavioral analytics, that can be incorporated. There are simple things such as a lot of these payments go to companies that have newly been incorporated. That is something we could track at the payment stage before the payment is left, especially where it's a different, these payments also aren't going to the same party every time. They'll be going to multiple different accounts. And so putting aside the crypto, instances where people are just sending cash, well, I say fiat, just, US dollar or whatever currency they've been asked to send, it's going to accounts they've never used before. Third parties at the bank will have never seen on their accounts in a jurisdiction that they never really sent money to. So none of this makes sense. And, the banks will argue, well, it's a needle in a haystack. Well, actually, it's not, because if you have 9 of these and example of the case where, over 1 million was lost, how could 9 of these have fallen through the fraud controls at the front end, and then the transaction monitoring controls? I don't understand it. And the fortunate thing is the banks can't explain it. And then you end up, the UK as an example, you end up having to go to the FOSS, the Financial Ombudsman. And what actually happens then is you have to wait 3-4 months for the case to be assigned. And then it's just a waiting game to find out what's going to happen. So what we all have to remember is there is a person who has lost their life savings behind this. And in some instances, and without being extreme, in some instances, these individuals kill themselves because of the shame, of the financial ruin. They lose everything. They can't pay their mortgage. They haven't, they haven't got a car. Sometimes they lose their jobs. And that's the reality of it. This is a pandemic in massive proportions. And we're not doing enough as an industry. The government is not doing enough. Education is key here. Education is the best way for us to proactively help. And the only people that are investing in education right now are the police force through funds that they have for basically combating crimes. They're actually having to use those resources to bring out adverts to basically help people understand, looking at these typologies. Why should this be coming out of the police's budget? Why is the government not doing more? Why isn't social media not doing more, especially with the likes of WhatsApp and Telegram and Facebook that are part of many of these scams where their platforms are being used? So are they part of it? No. Are they getting a financial return from the activity? Well, inadvertently, yes. So social media has a role to play. The governments have a role to play. The industry has a role to play, but individuals also have an obligation to educate themselves. So we need to do so much more. And the starting point for me is twofold: education coupled with better technology. And then we'll begin to see a change. But whether the banks will begin to use their hard-earned profits and bumper profits this year to invest in more AI, will come back to enforcement action, because unfortunately, banks are only really led with spending money when they need to spend the money. And the minute that the regulator's back is turned, the money will stop being spent in many cases.
Okay, well, look, hopefully today has been an education in some way, shape or form for many of the people that are listening. We know it's happening to far too many people. There are things that can be done, and we're here to help if we can. There'll be an email address that will come up on the screen and in the links that you can access both Oonagh and I over the next few days. But Oonagh, it was a pleasure. We didn't touch on as many scams as we would have wanted today, but I think that was a very good insight into how some of these things happen and how they can be stopped. I mean, just reverse engineering some of the pictures and the applications that you're getting. The internet is a wonderful source, but it can also be, very damaging if you believe everything that you see.
Absolutely. And if I may say as well, like, we have free resources available for people to help educate them. So we recently came out with these 100 financial crime flashcards of all of the different types of financial crimes. They're currently being translated into 12 different languages. So they're now available in Chinese, in Arabic, in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and there'll be other languages such as Hindu, etc., added this week. So, if anybody wants to access those cards, they're completely free, and they're available on the Raw Compliance Training Hub.
Okay, thank you very much, Oonagh.
Thank you.